Just get some options, and just welcome you all to our sixth guest lecture presentation as part of the RAMP program. It's great that you could be here live, and also hello to those listening to the recording. Before I introduce our very special guest, I would just like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians and ancestors of the lands upon which we're meeting today. I know we're gathering from right across New South Wales in Australia, but also from where Nicole is over in the US. And I'd just like to pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. And I would now like to introduce Nicole. As you probably are all aware, Nicole is globally recognised as an agroecologist, speaker, and author, with over 22 years of practical farming and food production experience and 18 years of experience as a regen ag coach and educator. Nicole is formally trained in soil science, organisational learning, pattern thinking, and adult education. And I'm just rapt that she's here today to talk on the topic of soil.
The internet connection is unstable.
And I'll just click the meeting and I'll hand over to Nicole and just thank her again for coming. I've been fortunate enough to have Nicole speak a few times, and I've always been blown away. So really looking forward to having you present with us again today, Nicole. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Simone. It's always such a pleasure to talk to you guys down under. I feel nostalgic every time I talk to Australians. I get a little homesick. You guys are doing such an interesting program, and I had a few ideas about what I wanted to share with you, but I think what I'd like to do is just start with, where are you guys at? You know, we can talk about soil, and it's such a broad topic, and I feel like most of you should be pretty keyed into soil health, what you're looking at. Is it possible for people to show me their videos? I recognize some of your names, but some of them are new. So is there any really driving question for you right now, just thinking about soil health, that we could kind of delve down into? You guys are the ones that are being mentored, not the mentees, is that right?
Yeah, and we've got a couple of the mentors online as well.
Yeah, recognize a few of these. So the goal with being mentored is for you to be able to understand soil health more deeply for yourselves, or are you in transition into a low input soil health program? Tell me a little bit. I'd like to hear from you.
Well, my name's John. I live in Robertson, New South Wales, above Wollongong. Yes, I've been practicing regen farming on my own for about 5 years, but I started seeking help about 2 years ago. And the first one was Hamish McKay and Charlie Arnott that I got involved with, that just gave me the impetus to get started. So then, starting to look more deeply into what I need to do and how to improve, I applied for this course, and I'm on the journey, and I'm learning things that my father used to do about 70 years ago that are now coming back into vogue, and I don't know why we ever changed. We should have stayed the way we were, and things would have been a whole lot better, I think.
I think you're right, John. Yeah, exactly. And what were some of the challenges for you in terms of building soil health?
Well, I got, when my dad died, I was a butcher. I was a farmer as a kid, then a butcher. Now I'm back as a farmer. And once Dad got older and couldn't do it, I went back and done more on the farm, and my son eventually took over the butcher shop. And I felt in myself that the farm was not producing like it used to. So I got a guy in from a well-known company. He started working on giving me more growth and more feed and all this, and it just turned out to be a nightmare. ended up paddocks getting eaten out with scarab grub. And we were using all these added chemicals, and it was getting me nowhere. So I learned a lesson there, and I was a bit hesitant to ask anyone after that, after what happened. Anyway, so I went and done this course, and I've started on that journey, and I'm into it. I've made the paddock smaller. I'm using natural products and things like that, but I will use. I've got a fella that works with CRT that is right into the regen with me. He's on the journey, but until we get to the point of being completely regen, we are using some conventional inputs at a much lesser rate than what we were using before. We're getting closer, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, and it's such a good point, John, and it's really interesting. Last month I did a presentation for the no-till on the plains, and they asked me to do a keynote based on, they were just sensing that some of these pretty large operations were feeling like they weren't doing it right, or they were, using some conventional products or using some regen products, when actually there's not really such a thing, John. And how they wanted me to kind of go through it is, wherever you are in your journey, that's wherever you are. And I think it's the comparison sometimes that can trip us up. But I like to think of the soil health journey as a little bit like raising a child, right? And we all have different parenting styles. We all have different challenges with our children. Some are more challenging, some are easier. And we just got to find our way through that. And I think it's the labeling or comparing ourselves when actually we're just on a journey. We're doing the best that we can. And hopefully you're measuring and seeing those successes as you go. How about somebody else? Where are you at?
Well, I'm feeling very nervous and a bit starstruck.
Shut the front door. What?
Ah, and yeah, there's a movie on in the background for my daughter that's I've told her that it's the important one and I need to concentrate. But it's giving me big feelings because the music is amazing in it. Anyway, I think with every step I take on this journey, I know less what I'm looking for and trying to achieve. But I think if I boiled it right down, it would just be that I can hear the language, that I can speak the same language, that I can be in communication and know what my role is as a custodian of land. And we haven't owned our own farm yet. My husband and I, we manage other people's properties. And I've always found that a pretty deep paradigm to break, that lack of scope or lack of decision-making ability. But I'm learning to just live with it, and make my own context, or make my own context for my family, and how the relationship works for us and country. And I mean, there's lots of specifics and there's lots of technical stuff that I really, really want to delve into, and especially after reading your book. Thanks, Murray. Murray's just down there with all his stuff off. But I just realized how illiterate I was, how I just have no idea really how to, I just want to, I just wished I could speak the language. I just want to be able to talk with the country properly, have communication.
Yeah, excellent.
Like in the old way, like in the old ancient agricultural communities had that ability, and we just don't in Australia. We just don't have that time with the land without it being, a sort of substrate mindset. And my husband works for a conventional dairy, So he's very, he's on the other side of it where he's deep in the substrate mindset and productivity
Yeah.
mind. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And I think this is the biggest part. And to go back to John's earlier comment, I think the trap is thinking that there's something regenerative or there's something conventional when actually all there is our relationship. You
Yeah.
either have a relationship where you are inside the world, like we're fitting in the world and we're finding how would nature do this and how can I align myself more closely with nature's rhythms versus how do I control, how do I dominate, how do I force something to my will. It's interesting actually reading you guys' soil health booklet that came through is that there was a comment in there from the indigenous viewpoint, and I'm not necessarily sure that that's true, that there wouldn't have been some modification of a natural environment. And I just relate it to my ancestral knowledge of we work within nature, and sometimes that is a modification of the environment. That might be keeping seeds, it might be building a bed for perennial grasses, it might be catching fish, whatever that looks like is how do we do that in a way that's not extractive? And I think the faster that we shift that mindset, then you don't need to have the words, Becky, you just have that relationship, right? And I think having to feel like we have the scientific terminology, it's okay. I mean, we can feel like we're smarter than someone because we've got the words, but actually at the end of the day, what does it mean? And actually, Fig Rig, is your name Fig Rig? Because that's pretty cool. Your parents obviously liked liked it a lot. Anyway, this idea of having cows, you don't need cows. Big rig, you don't need cows. That I talk about the essence of cows. So how could you maybe look at something like bringing in good quality compost or composted manures or whatever? But the idea is not to introduce livestock like a four-legged ruminant or a sheep or cattle. It is how do we encourage more biodiversity of living organisms below and above the ground? So I've got some friends at the moment and they have a big pivot irrigation system. And what he noticed was birds were landing on this pivot. So he's moving his pivot and he's calling it birdigation, using birds to irrigate his property with their manure when they all come in these huge flocks. And it's like, how do we create that environment that just encourages more and more life? Is there anything else anyone else wants to add? And then I might just kick into a couple of visuals.
Nicole, I'm in Orange, and I got all my cover crops planted, everything done. I've been on the journey for about 5 years, similar to John. I follow Gabe Brown pretty religiously, and I've had some help from Cole Seiss, but I just found like we struggle for rain and we're desperate for it now. And my cover crops came up and now they're wilting badly. And so, but the thing I've noticed is as some of the pastures that I've been strip grazing, the electric fence posts I can put in with my foot still, even though things are really dry. Whereas 5 years ago, I'd had to belt it in with a hammer. So I feel some progress, but I do realise that nothing will happen without water. And, I look at, and I know I've got to try and increase the amount of organic material in my soil to be able to get a greater holding capacity. But how do you get that much organic matter if you're still trying to graze cattle? And there's just not that much compost around for me without sort of creating green manure crops and sort of trying to put them straight back into the soil. But then what do I do with my cows?
Yeah. Okay. Good question. And I think it's one many battle with. What kind of rainfall have you had? What's your average rainfall in the last 5 years been?
Oh, well, in the La Nina years, we were up around 1,200, 1,400 mils. This year, we've had very minimal. Normally, we'd be about an 800 mil rainfall.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
It's been all over the place. And before La Nina, we had 3 years of drought. So
Yeah. Oh, yeah, right. Yes, and I was in Orange in last April. I've been to Orange a couple times. It's a beautiful part of the country. Simone has just informed me that it's Fee. Hey, Greg, and I think I actually have heard of you, Fee, so I apologize, not Fig Rig, because that's my apologies. I'm going to offend somebody at some point, so hopefully you're okay. All right, well, let me maybe share a couple slides. And what I'd like you to do is just ask me questions as we go, understanding that it sounds like there's a huge diversity of people and backgrounds and understanding and where you are in the world. I think if I do this, it shall work. So just tell me, is it one slide? My book?
Yeah, we're good. Yeah, your book.
Yeah. All right, hopefully you guys all have this. If you haven't read it, it is also on Audible. So I find for busy producers, often Audible books are the best way to absorb information. Right. We've been talking a little bit. I can hear you guys talking about principles. We have a couple of different ones than maybe what the USDA is pushing. And again, I think this comes down to context a little bit too, but we talk about a collaborative mindset, and this is what we were talking about earlier, right? That I'm fitting in the world and collaborating with nature. I might be collaborating with other people. I don't have a competition mindset. I don't have a scarcity mindset. I don't have an extractive world domination mindset. All right. Then the next piece is, how do I maximize photosynthesis? Keeping soil covered, optimizing, reducing inputs, context specific, and context shapes everything. Optimizing disturbance. So we're not saying we're not going to use an ag chemical. We're not going to say that you're not going to use cultivation. At times, there might be some kind of disturbance event. That might be fire, right? At what times, thanks, Kathy, at what times would disturbance be required rather than avoiding, right? Rather than being dogmatic about some things. Like, I'm always looking at how good can we get it? How little does it is required when we're talking about a lot of these biological interactions, plant interactions, communications from plant even to plant to animal, a parts per billion, that there's communication happening around us all the time. How little does it take to start to shift our soils and start to shift our plants to more and more of a virtuous cycle of nutrition and health, right? And then increasing that diversity of plants and animals. And like I said, that doesn't have to be a cow. What does that look like for you, right? Okay, so I want you to imagine if we were, and actually, I'm about to put out a coloring book with a friend of mine who's 16, and we've done a book together, imagining what it's like to be underneath the soil. So if you close your eyes for a minute, and just picture yourself like down under the roots. There's these microphones now. You can actually listen in on that soil environment, and it's like, what can you hear? What can you smell? If you were a bacteria, there are smells going on all the time. There's corridors, there's walls, there's imagine it like a great big city, right? And you're down there in the darkness and you're on a super highway and you go down that highway and then there's huge big apartment buildings and the walls are made by fungi that are sticking together all those micro aggregates. Then through those are tunneling your protozoa, your nematodes. These guys are making all the different holes. You might have a hospital, you might have a school, you might have a bank, and you may in fact have a pub right? You can open your eyes. So if you can picture all of that environment there, there's all these spaces where microbes and organisms are moving. The earthworms will be coming down the middle of this and making those super highways, and they're dragging biology with them and inoculating different areas. I had someone once describe a cultivation event as being a little bit like, it's not, it's not so bad for microbes. And it's like, no, literally, you've just come in and you've taken some nudists from Byron Bay and thrown them up into Northern Territories, into crocodile country, right? That's what you've done with that cultivation disturbance event, is we shift all these microbial communities, we disturb all of this, and we can actually create compaction. And if we create compaction, then what happens is we lose the school, we burn off that carbon, we're losing our bank account. If you keep cultivating, or we keep spraying, or you keep overgrazing, then we'll start to lose the pub. And what happens in communities when we lose our pubs? Wayne, tell me, what happens? Yeah, you lose your community. Everyone's gone, right? Especially in Australia. Right. Now, there's so much life under there. There's, as you know, there's more life under the soil than there is above ground. There's more biodiversity. The reason that there's so much life under the soil is that this is the engine room for the planet. This is the lungs. This is our gas exchange. This is your water. There's so much more research coming out now, and it's very exciting to see about the role of soil with the short water cycle and climate. Right? Not short, small water cycle, right? And you guys have Walter Yearn, who's been talking about that for a long time, but it's good to see more and more people talking about this. But imagine this is all that gas exchange, all that air and water moving. So I want to show you an example of what this looks like in reality. I show this research quite a lot because it was on a good friend of mine's property, Nick Patterson. So this research was started, I believe, in 2004. Now, what was cool about it is you've got two properties side by side, separated only by a hedgerow, same altitude, same rainfall, same soil type. And this was the integrated system. So this was Plant and Food Researchers Research Lab. So you can see they do everything that they can to make it pretty. So we're going to herbicide underneath the trees because we love the terroir of glyphosate on apples because it's so delicious. Sorry. And then we're mowing that very, very low. Then you're going to have irrigation systems, drip systems to ensure they've got enough water. They measured how much carbon they had. They had 5.3 pounds of carbon per yard. Oh, God, sorry. It's not in metric. I've actually lost metric. It's terrible. But in that top, so 10 centimeters, 5.3 pounds. I can't do it. Just can't do it. Sorry. Anyway, the next measurement's also in pounds, so you can compare. All right. So then they compared across the row. So these guys were not using any compost. They're herbiciding. They're irrigating. This in the biological system. They were applying compost. They were allowing the grass to grow. There was no irrigation because there was no irrigation needed. And they had not quite, but nearly twice the amount of carbon in that top 4 inches. Now, I don't know where they took this photo from. I never remember seeing trees looking like this. He had a pretty immaculate looking orchard. Now, what's interesting is this is what it looked like in 2004. By about 2008 and 9, what was really interesting is the plant species changed. They shifted away from grasses and they became things like wild alyssum and wild strawberries, low growing, companion species to trees. So what I want you to think of is if you are in an orchard, like if you're growing macadamias, if you're in a grassland ecosystem, what would that have looked like? What was the species compositions? What are the companion plants for many of those plant species? So as we start to see wild strawberries coming in, what that's telling us is we've become more fungal dominant, right? Now, what was super cool about what they did with this is they took an image of the pore spaces in the soil. So down to that 10 centimeters, what you're looking at here is an X-ray image. So it's called a mass tomography, but basically it's just an X-ray machine. So on the left is the integrated pest managed, and on the right is the regenerative. And what they found was most of that, so there was actually more air in the soil on the right than there was soil. So, you might have been shown like soil is 50% minerals, 25% air, 25% water, right? You might have seen that. This soil has 78% air. So what it means is it's got no limitation to air and water movement. It bounces up behind equipment. You can drive on these soils, and these soils can hold an incredible amount of water. We measured 18 inches in an hour. I don't know what that is in metric. It's quite low. 18 inches. Yeah, Becky.
Well,
Boy. Right. 18 inches. What is it? Like 400 millimeters in an hour.
450.
Sorry?
450.
450. Thank you, Wayne. I knew someone would know how to do math. So when we see these rainfall events and we get an inch of rain and everybody's flooding, that is a land management problem, right? So they did a trial on this soil where they applied 2,4-D. So they put the 2,4-D on the soil on the left. And where do you think that went? If you imagine you get a moisture event and you apply a chemical, where does this, on that integrated pest managed, where is that 2,4-D going to go?
Probably going to run off.
Runoff, yes. And if you think 2,4-D is one of the chemicals implicated in the reef die-off, right? So just straight into your waterways, straight into the reef. When they applied the 2,4-D on the regenerative, when they remeasured it, there was no 2,4-D. There was no 2,4-D that came off the bottom of it. There was nothing that came off the top of it. They thought, well, maybe some idiot forgot to put it in, and they did it again. Same thing happened. So what's happened is these soils have bioaccumulated. They've broken down that 2,4-D into its component parts. It's been eaten by somebody, and it stays out of the food chain, right? They also found there was reduced greenhouse gas emissions, obviously, nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, methane off that soil on the right. All right, so you want to create a soil like this. What does it take? What was also interesting is they didn't require irrigation on this soil. Any questions about that? I think it's very cool. Nope. Then what was really interesting, well, it's all, I have to stop saying interesting. I find everything interesting. And I'm like, it's become the only word I say. It's so interesting. Oh my gosh. So they looked at what was the greatest pore space, what was the greatest connectivity. And if you imagine that's 10 centimeters deep, what's likely to have made a burrow like that? You can put it in the chat, or you could say.
Root death or earthworms or root death or something
not on earth. Yeah, not too big. If you think that's 10 centimeters, then yeah, the hole's probably. Yeah. So I would suspect this is going to be a grass grub, right? This is going to be a grass grub. It might be a cicada. It might be your pest.
Finding a little larvae spot to birth. Yep.
So it's not likely to be earthworms. It'll be an insect that's causing some kind of root chewing. So we've dug in soils like these, and we dug a soil that was a shovel by a shovel by a shovel, and you want to do this a lot and start counting your insect pests. And we found in that one shovel, oh gosh, now I can't remember. I think it might have been 20 cicadas and no earthworms. Now, cicadas cause a huge amount of damage, right? And what they like is they like these compacted soils. So this is a compacted soil, right? When it looks like that and you don't have a lot of air spaces, these are compacted soils. So what happens then is we don't have our natural fungal protection. We don't have adequate nutrition to that plant. We don't have gas exchange. We have all sorts of gnarly stuff starts to build up. Things like ethylene will start building up in those compaction zones. And now we don't have your natural biocontrols. So some of the cordyceps mushrooms, there's a bunch of different fungi that will infect insects, and you have a bunch of them in Australia. You have some really, really cool, they're called entomopathogenic fungi, but basically that means insects that get infected by different types of fungi. They're also entomopathogenic bacteria and nematodes, right? They will not live in compacted soils. So for a lot of you, you've got compacted soils because your organic matter is very low. Potentially your pH is very low, unless you're on some of those big, beautiful black self-mulching soils, right? You guys, across many regions of Australia have lost your organic matter, and as a consequence, we've got these compaction zones, right? So the soil on the right has more biology, and 79% of it was totally connected, right? There's no limitation to air or water movement. You can soak in all of that water and then slowly release it over time, right? Which is kind of what Australia's now lost, right? That ability to operate like a sponge and then to slowly release over time.
Yeah.
It has gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of it as I guess, a visual. There's your root hairs. You got your mycorrhizal fungi that are inside those plant hairs. We then have that aggregate, which is our crumbs, and that's all being stuck together. I want you to think about basically what you're looking at is microbial poos and wheeze and spit and vomit and all this stuff that microbes do all the time. It's what sticks these aggregates together and then
Yes.
gives us that stability. So hopefully you guys have you done a slaking test?
Yep.
Murray, when that research was done, that was about 5 years in, right? So he had that orchard for another 5 years, and it just got better and better and better, in terms of yeah
Production.
what was growing.
Yeah,
Sorry,
great.
Becky.
In terms of production as well of apples.
Well, the problem was, and it was happening across so I was at that time working as an organic pip fruit. I was working in the organic pip fruit managing projects, and they were all growing Braeburn, and Braeburn has been bred for high inputs. So these guys are
Yeah.
some of them were doing 80 lime sulfurs a season.
Yeah.
80.
Yeah, right.
So a lot of that tree health I don't think was great, and I think in part it's rootstock, in part it was breeding. So what I've noticed and what I've seen in the industry since is a lot of those guys pulled those trees out and started again,
Can you
and the
do
industry
that?
collapsed.
Can you do that feasibly? Like it's sort of similar to what happens around here with people trying to have Angus cattle on the coast. It's like they're a very high input, high chemical requirement breed, and not particularly suited to a low input system. But you can just sell them and get some different cows. But how can you do that with apples feasibly? Like if you want to change your system and your species no longer works, is it feasible to pull them out and plant again? Like how I have no idea. I just have no idea about apples. Coastal girl here. Yep.
Well, I
Like how
think
long do
you
they?
could apply that. You could apply it to anything, right? If you are
Yeah.
using a highly, I mean, you could even apply this to the idea of like racehorses, right?
Yeah.
That they've bred something to run fast, but then you end up with all these hoof problems or behavioral problems. It's the
Oh,
same in the
yeah.
apple trees. They bred them for very high production. I mean, I like a good Braeburn, but they have very poor disease resistance, and that was
Yeah.
not something that was easily remediated. I mean, these guys, I think, were doing a really good job. And he had cut out a lot of the other external inputs, but they were still chasing powdery mildew. And I
Yeah.
think if you were doing something like a lime sulfur, a lot of these organic fungicides, well, this one in particular, it damages the leaf surface. So they were just chasing their tails.
Yeah.
Really was the only way I could think about it. So they kind of weren't getting ahead. I mean, I believe they could have done it regeneratively, but they needed to let go of the side of the swimming pool, which I think, John, you were kind of referring to is it's really hard to let go of some of those chemical inputs because you have to balance that in the interim and
Yeah.
maybe lose your crop
Yeah.
when it's in that poor shape. But I think you could weigh that up to the cost of replanting because that's
Yeah.
an expensive exercise.
How long does it take to get to productive age with apples? Do you know?
It depends, you know, they can start producing 4 or 5 years. I mean,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
full production. Yeah, it's not like macadamias or, I mean, even avocados, 5, 6, 7 years. You're
Yeah.
getting
Yeah, yeah,
good.
yeah. Because I remember, I
Um,
think I remember he stopped doing it, didn't he? And now he's got a whole different business plan. He's using that
yeah,
property for something completely different, which is awesome. But I just wonder how many people would think that diversely or that dynamically, you know? That,
well,
I
this
have
is the
apples. This is all I do.
well, it's context, right, Becky? I
Yeah.
think for them, you know, you're getting older and you're like, what do I want to do? You know,
Yeah.
and I just want to relax a bit and make some money. So, you know, they got
Yeah.
into Airbnb. Good on
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
You know, and this is the piece of why I don't like the dogma and why I don't like people coming in and telling someone what to do is only you know what you want to do.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's why we train people to coach, not to be an expert and kind of tell people what to do because you
Yeah.
might want to do racehorses. Cool.
Good luck to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you know, and talking about context, you know, I arrive on properties, I often don't know their history. I might arrive into an area and I've never seen that soil before. I mean, coming to Western Australia and seeing the silver loams, which are not, they're not loams, they're just sand. Just so you know. But the silver loams, that was that was quite shocking. And for people to say, "Oh, what do you think?" You know, and I had no idea, I had no point of reference is just to be able to find that context, find that point of reference. So in this situation, I was on a property that had been using holistic adaptive grazing, mob grazing, whatever you want to call it, for 30 years. And everywhere that we went, we could not get the shovel in the ground. Um, every single paddock was like hitting into concrete. And
Yeah.
he just said, oh, well, you know, it's like this in summer. And so I asked him to dig underneath the fence line. And he honestly nearly fell on his face because the shovel just went straight through like a knife through butter. And so the soil on the left is like 10 feet away, 2.5 meters away from the soil on the right, which is underneath the fence line. So tell me what you guys can see. What's the difference between left and right?
This is the size of the aggregates to start with, but just looks, it's just so hardcore. That chunk, like how could you infiltrate that with anything? It's mega.
Anyone else?
There's a lot of water on the left.
Yeah. Yeah. You see it's not soaking in. What else?
Color variation,
Color?
darker on the
Yes.
right.
Yes. Yeah.
Organic matter, there's more sort of bits and pieces in it. There's more inclusions.
Yeah. Beautiful. So do this for yourself. You know, dig underneath a fence line somewhere that hasn't been disturbed for a while and just take a look. You know, what is the potential for your soil? I love going back through historical accounts and trying to find like old paintings, the oldest photographs you can find. You know, I've been on
Yeah.
places that were like, there used to be 40,000 sheep here, and now I have 100. And you're like, oh, okay. You know, what did it take for those 40,000 sheep? And then what did it look like when the sheep left? You know, and
Yeah.
I guess it depends whose accounts you're looking at. But yeah, some of the reading. Is it the greatest estate or
Yeah. Greatest estate on earth. Yeah.
or is it Dark Emu? It was in Dark Emu, he said it took 3 years after the sheep arrived for the organic matter to blow away. You know, and I think this is what we see in some of these super brittle environments. Like this photograph is from a very brittle environment, is you just yeah, you got to give that land more rest. There's got to be more ability to recover. So tell me, who's building those aggregates? What's driving that aggregate stability and what's driving that formation of those little crumbs? What does that?
All the
Bugs.
soil livestock.
The fungi.
Yeah.
Fungi, yeah. So
Carbon.
fungi are going to help build those crumbs, the carbon. Wayne, what do you want to?
It's just all the bugs, the whole biodiversity that's within the soil.
Mm.
Yeah, lovely. So it's all the byproducts of the microbes going to form the aggregate, but what are they feeding on? What drives that? What's behind it all?
All the food for them in there. I don't know, the sugars and the root death and
The
yeah.
cover.
Very
The
good. Thank
plant.
you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You guys have got it right. So it is that sugar production. Both of these photographs are from Australia.
Mm.
And what you're looking at, this is what we call the rhizosheath or the rhizosheath is fine. So looking at these kind of structures, that's all of those sugars being exuded. You've got mucilage. This is not a measurement of mycorrhizae, just in case some of you thought that it was. This is just byproducts of that plant driving energy into the soil, driving sugars into the soil, and getting that whole system turning over. So I really want you to consider one, context. So when you're looking at your own property, like comparing yourself to others, it's like your context is so different. Your history might be so different. I saw another paper came out today that looked at properties that have been organic for more than 20 years are still dealing with ag chemicals. Like those ag chemicals are so persistent. So what was used in the past was that atrazine and paraquat and glean. Is that stuff still sitting around? What are you doing to support microbes and breaking that down? That property on the right, oh my goodness, doesn't really look like we've got a lot of organic matter. Is there compaction? What's going on? But really, the first thing that's driving that aggregation and driving soil formation is capturing sunlight energy, right? And we can do that through diversity, ground cover, nutrition, biological activity. That's what drives air, then water, then food, and then our minerals, right? So we borrowed this from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but in the soil, so Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that in order to survive, your number one thing that you need in life is air. Air comes before anything else. You need to be able to breathe, right? Then water, then food, then minerals. In the soil, it's driven by sunlight, right? So Michael, very good. That's a good question. Right. I will stop sharing, but I want you to be thinking about that rest and recovery in terms of photosynthetic potential, solar panels, what's happening with your bricks. There was a question at the start, which I haven't got to, about how do you measure bricks, but measuring sunlight capture. So Michael, your question's really good, and it's a reality, right? So what I want you to consider is rest and recovery, like adequate recovery for plants and plant roots, and profitability are not in opposition. They're not an or, they're an and, right? So they think of them a little bit like on a seesaw, and we're always trying to balance so that we're achieving those long-term goals and also achieving your short-term profitability, right? So for you, it might be, hey, this paddock, one paddock out of 20, I'm going to miss once in my rotation. What does that look like? Or right now, I'm just going to come across everything really fast. Or, it has been super dry or it has been super wet. I'm just going to sacrifice an area, right? Well, there's always compromises in farming. So I think, I don't know about a process and a model, but I think being adaptable. But at the end of the day, I want people digging holes, because what I've seen with some of the best adaptive grazers in the world is they're not digging holes, and they're not realizing that actually their grazing's still not allowing adequate recovery below the ground, right? So what we see is root systems like that. Now you're in some trouble. Oh, was someone asking a question? Is it just background noise? So we've got 15 minutes left, so I'm happy just to keep going down. Simone, if you're happy with that. Yeah. So Gavin's question, we have some groups on the north coast, New South Wales, high rainfall and flood affected, highly acidic. The path to soil health is complex, some disturbance, and reintroduction of diversity is crucial. How does acidity impact soil biology? This is where supporting plants. So I have a program that I really recommend after flooding. To kickstart, because what we saw, you guys had that, you had drought years, you had the fire years, and then you had the flood years, and many of you had those experiences, right? And what I saw on some properties that were still doing a pretty good job is they came out of that wet time and got really hard. I don't know if you guys had that experience.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry. And so really looking at how can we jumpstart that system? And so yeah, you could put a crop in, and if you're going to do that, what we're going to do is bioprime that seed, put something on that seed to create that rhizosheath. So that rhizosheath can protect that plant from as much as 2 units of pH. So you might have a pH of 4.5. If you have a good rhizosheath and you've done that by putting something on the seed, some kind of biology or compost extracts, then that plant's now experiencing 6.5, right? So that's the key to the engine room, because what we see in a lot of Australian circumstances is we have naked roots and we have, I can't say that to a bunch of Australians, can I? So you can say that in America, no one knows what a naked root is. But yeah.
As compared to a clothed root.
Yes, lots of clothes on, right?
Or,
So as
or half clothed. Oh,
I should say nothing.
that's
So yeah,
hilarious.
as opposed to that rhizosheath, right? Is now we have protection. You have protection against water fluctuations, protection against acidity, temperature. There's so much stuff that starts working when you get a rhizosheath, right? But if you're planting naked seeds, or you're putting seeds down with like a neonicotinoid or something like that, then you bypass all of that ability to build that sheath. So I'm a big fan. Sorry, Becky.
Oh, no, I keep thinking that you finished and then you're not, and I should just wait till you finished. Yeah.
Fire away.
Oh, okay. Is that in a specific inoculant coating, or because I'm just going to buy some, there's a cover crop seed company that we get seed from, and now they do a vermiculite coating, which is pretty cute. That's exciting to try. But like, what's how would we do? How do you get it? How do you do it? And do you do it based off specific sort of soil bacterial tests? Of what you're lacking and what you're not, or is it like a plant specific kind of inoculation? Oh,
That's a big question, Becky, because there's
it
it's going to depend on your context, right? And what I've seen on, if you're early transitioning, we see people have a lot of problems with trace elements, so manganese and molybdenum. So we're doing like trace elements on the seed, chelated, very, very, very low rates. Like I'm talking grams per hectare.
Oh, that's
so we
cute.
put tiny. Yeah, well, it's cheap if you're making your own. It's expensive commercially, but then you got a bunch of you guys in Australia have access to some of the best products, right? You have some really good products that you could put on seed, or you could be making your own. And
Yeah.
my heart belongs with the worm. I will always recommend worm or vermi extracts on seeds above everything else. So we do about 4 liters per ton of seed, and see some really, oh my gosh, just phenomenal results by doing that. I might actually have a picture. It's really cool. So it's the kind of thing you want to trial for yourself to just see. I put something on the seed. What does it do? But I would look at your own soil tests and take a look to see, is there something, not soil tests, actually, leaf tissue tests to take a look at what's going on with the plant. Do you have a rhizosheath?
Yep. Great. And you also talk about creating your own inoculants from like productive areas of your farm and like cool places that you really vibe on in your farm. That's something I'll be really interested to do as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, easily done and I think really cost effective.
Yeah. I mean,
I'll
we
just
do
show
it. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so I would Kathy, what's interesting is what's happening in New Zealand right now is there's enough interest from regenerative producers asking for uncoated seed that I wouldn't yeah, you guys have got to get together and you know, farmer power and just get access to this seed, right?
It's just so expensive still over here. Like the uncoated
untreated
stuff's like twice the
uncoated
price.
stuff. Isn't that ridiculous? What a bunch of, you know what's so
Yeah.
gross.
But it's
They
just
should,
the logistics of it, I think, because it's so they have to, catch it before it goes through all its usual processes, and then, ensure that they've got the right amount for you and then freight your tiny little amount around. They always get the shits with me. But I found a couple of people that only do bare coated seed, or I mean bare uncoated seed. I just put them in the chat box.
yeah. So there are a lot of options in Australia. I think you guys have some great resources to network to find stuff. So what I want to show you with this image is they put on 25 kilos per hectare of a high fungal compost. And that was applied to the seed and also as a liquid drench. And all that they did was they treated 1 meter by 1 meter squares throughout this paddock. And basically what you can see is everything else around it hasn't germinated. I mean, there's a little bit of sorghum Sudan. So the cover crop was put across the whole field, and the only place that they saw it really take off is in these trial patches. So you don't need to do huge trials. You can just do something like this. So where the little yellow flags are, can you see that? Is that clear?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. So there and there.
No,
And there's the one back here is where the trials were basically. So you can do this stuff. You can do it really simply yourself, right? So do little trials like that. Doesn't have to be expensive. You just have to find something that is good quality when you're doing stuff. Right. What have we got? We've only got a few minutes. 8 minutes. All right. Anyone else? Different questions? Wayne's on the phone. Make us a cup of tea, Wayne.
Yeah, come on, Wayne. I want a cover.
Becky, I might let someone else ask a question. I feel
Yeah,
like
all right. I'm giving them plenty of time to pipe up.
Michael.
Us introverts just don't want to pipe
Oh,
up.
don't call me an extrovert, mate. I'm just getting it together. I'm caffeinated.
So I want to explore a little bit more about this rest and recovery. And so you say skip a paddock. Yeah, I understand that. I can do that. Do we just leave the grasses to grow and to become long and rank and then put our cattle in it next time? Understand that the feed value will be pretty low. Like I can rest it, I can let it recover, but what do I do with it then?
Yeah. And it's such a good question, Michael, because there's two parts to this. And one is that rank is in a low biological system. So what we find is, I know it's wild, but as we start to feed more biology, we start to build more carbon, is that the taller stuff becomes higher quality. So what we're seeing in dairy farm systems that I work in is that we're up to kind of anywhere between above the knee to the hip that sometimes they're coming into, which traditionally they would think of as rank, and the metabolizable energy is going up. And what's driving that is microbiology, in particular fungi. So what I find in a lot of Australian biological tests is you guys are really low in active fungi and you're really low in protozoa. And that's all about, what you're doing activity wise. I would look at it as you're slowly lifting that nutrition rather than letting something go rank, and then you're going to lose animal performance, right? You're going to be stressing animals. But that paddock, let's say you just missed one paddock out of 20 and you did come in, you're going to weigh that up as maybe it's not going to be the best stuff, but you're going to hit it really hard, like bring in a lot of manure and animal impact to really trample that. And then basically what you've done is you've just composted that field. And so you kind of look at it, the cost of maybe a setback, like I do it with dry cows, or I do it with, animals that aren't such high value. You're not necessarily, either hitting your plane in nutrition or trying to fatten them or whatever, right? So using animals as different tools. But I think overall for most producers, what you're trying to do is just slowly lift it. So that might be that you're going to do what I think it was Wayne was talking about, got more paddocks. Yeah. So you're able to slow, so you're not coming back as often, but you're getting better animal impact. And then, some of my guys, what they do is they actually come in and they're spraying biologicals ahead of the cattle. So you might even do like a small amount of molasses and a small amount of sea mineral or sea salt, and you're putting that, got to watch it in Australia. Don't do that where you've got a lot of sodium, but you're going to do that before you bring animals in, and then you're not going to crash their performance so much, but you're actually going to be benefiting that field as well. So you've got lots of tools in the toolkit, Michael. So don't feel like you've got to compromise in animal performance. Right.
So can I play that back to you, if that's okay?
Yeah. Yes, please.
So I rest a paddock, I skip it in my rotation, come back to it, and basically get as many head as I can on it and try to strip graze it and use the animal feed and poo and wee and compact it all down and basically grind it into the soil. Not grind it into the soil, but use that, and they will graze it and eat it anyway and work their way through.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
So you might have seen like the non-selective, is it Johann Zeichmann talks about non-selective grazing. There's one thing that you can do, which is you concentrate them for one day in a smaller strip and then open it up. So then they've got more access. Then you're going to concentrate them and then open it up, concentrate, open it up. And it's going to alter their rumen, right? But you're only going to do it for a day, and then that's going to give you some feedback in terms of how effective was that? Am I moving my soil forwards? And I've had quite a few people do it by accident because they've maybe cut half a field for hay and then gone, oh crap, I don't have time to come back and do it, so I'm just going to put animals in there. And they've put a lot of animals in, and oh my gosh, 7 years later you can still see where they did that in terms of better grass, right? So I think that the best analogy I like is keep it guessing, like keep your fields guessing like a game. Like, am I going to come in or am I not? How many animals, like instead of this New Zealand rotational overgrazing model. Anyhow. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael. There is one more quick one in the chat there from Trish about what sort of leaf tissue tests would help to understand plant health. I don't know if that's a quick question or not, but if you can do it in 2 minutes.
I love EAL. We used to send tests to EAL from New Zealand and the US until labs got better overseas. So you guys have, and actually you can send leaf tissue tests to most Australian laboratories will do plant tissue testing. What you want though is a laboratory that'll give you desired ranges so you can make some sense of it. So make sure that the lab you're using does do that, and I'm pretty sure EAL does. But yes, and when you do that, just choose one plant, right? You're not doing a feed analysis to assess it for animal performance. You're doing it for plants. And, if you're macadamias or grapevines, you want to be looking at it from that plant's, is that plant reaching its full genetic potential? And then what I also want you to do is if you have, say, an invasive plant that you don't want, test that as well. And we've seen some really cool stuff, especially like with capeweed. comparing that to the plant that we want to grow and what is that weed trying to tell you. And the leaf tissue test will give you a lot of information about that if you wanted to address it minerally or whatever. But yeah, thank you. That's a good question.
Great. Is that all? Kathy, you didn't have any?
That's great. It's 9 o'clock at night here.
I was going to type something about, you know, how you were talking about like confining animals with like an electric and then opening it up. Sometimes I do that just with slashing. Like I'll slash like half a paddock and then I'll put the cows in. So they'll just stay on where the longer grass is. They won't kind of eat where the slash bit is. So yeah, it's kind of like, that might be another way for Michael to sort of, you know, if he's got a paddock and he wants to concentrate animals in a smaller spot. But I don't know, is that the right thing? I just kind of do it. But
I guess it depends how low you're slashing it. I always like a little higher left residual.
Oh, it's been so wet here, like the grass, like literally it grows with, you know, while you're watching it. So yeah, I'm just battling it at the moment. Not so yeah, I cut it pretty low at the moment. It would modify if it was, you know, I probably wouldn't do it at all if it was drought or dry conditions.
Yeah, no, it's great. That's a really good point. Cool. All right. I'll let you. Do you guys have another class? Do you keep going if I hop off?
No, we don't now. That's it for today. And then they meet with their mentors next week. And they just do kind of a rotation like that. So I'm sure that's plenty to go away with today and feast on. So thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. As always, you guys have just the best bunch of people.
I really appreciate it. Yeah. We love your thinking and we love your work. So thank you.
Oh, and our Create School, which is for agroecologists wanting to kind of turn this into a career. The applications for that are open right now to come to Yellowstone here in Montana. You want to do it. It'll be really fun. It's on my website. But we've got probably half a dozen Australians have applied already. So I think we're going to have a really strong Australian contingency in this one. So if you guys think you're ready to do this as a career, then look us up.
Amazing. It sounds like an excellent opportunity. Sounds like fun. Amazing.
Excellent. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Nicole.
Bye. Bye.